Hi all. If you are a returning viewer, welcome back. If you are new, welcome. My name is Amira, and today guys we are going to be doing two things. We're going to be playing some more with this palette because I feel like I didn't do it justice with my last video because I was too focused on just chit-chatting with you guys and telling you all of the shenanigans that were afoot this summer in my life. And so I wanted to play with it some more, and I also just have a better idea of what I want to play with. There's some colors in here that I've got some ideas, you know. And so I want to do that, but then also I want to chat with you about all the books I read this summer, because I did, even though I had a lot going on, reading has become, I mean, it used to be for me anyway, and then I kind of got away from it. And in the past like 2.5 years, I've really gotten back to reading, and reading is such a stress reliever for me. So because this summer was stressful, I actually did a lot of reading. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, guys, so I have not a whole lot on my face. I did my brows off camera, as I always do, and I have some sunscreen on because I don't know. I might be going out on the town, and by on the town, I mean like running to the bank or something. I don't know. I might put it off and procrastinate and do it tomorrow, but I'm like, I'll put some sunscreen on just in case. And so that's all that's on my face. I'm now going to put on my foundation. And I've actually been wearing like extra foundation recently, which is wild. I've gone from like one extreme to the other because this whole summer I've been just putting like spot concealing and that's it, like no foundation. And now this past like week and a half, 2 weeks, I've just really been enjoying wearing, like, because it had cooled off quite considerably, and now I felt like I could put makeup on without feeling like I'm being like it's gonna melt off my face. Having said that, we're now on a slight little heat wave here in Chicago for some strange reason. But I'm gonna put foundation on because I'm just in the mood to wear this foundation again. I've been using this one a ton lately. It's one of my faves that I own. It's the Smashbox Always On Skin Balancing Foundation. The color is not like exactly perfect, but once I put everything on, it usually looks really pretty good. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of this on, and this is kind of like the foundation I wear when I want foundation, but I know with this one I can just put a little bit and it's not going to be like too heavy, and it also still will give me the coverage that I need, you know. So I'm just putting that on a flat dash, and then you can get into books. So I wanted to just kind of go over like the best, the worst, and the meh of what I've read this past summer. So well, technically we're still in summer, even though it's September. Summer doesn't end for another 2 weeks. So technically it's still summer. So I read about 12 books this summer, which is pretty good. Like my goal for the year, I set a goal of 40 books for the year. And last year I set a goal of like, I think like 30. And I had surpassed it, and so I was like, okay, we're gonna up the game, we're gonna up the goal, because you've been reading a lot, you can hit 30 pretty easily, which I did. Well, this year I hit my goal like in May, I think, of this year. Like I had a goal of 40. I hit my goal maybe not even in May, maybe April. So yeah, I was like, oh, next year I should probably, go up again. So I think right now I'm at like 54 books. So I've more than hit my goal. I'm going in with my my Salt New York Best Case concealer, which is the concealer that I've been using all summer long. And what I like about this, with combining it with like a kind of like high coverage or medium high coverage kind of satin finish foundation, is that it can make everything just look really skin-like, because this has some emolliency to it, so it just keeps everything from looking a little too flat, which I like. So I'm just putting that on. And so yeah, so I'm like, okay, we've more than hit the goal. That's great. And this summer I think is part of the reason why I like really surpassed the goal, because I was reading so much. So like I said, I read 12 books this summer, and I want to just go by first talking about should I start with the worst or the best? Or should I go back and forth? I have a whole list. So let's see. Let's start off with the worst, because the worst list is actually not that long, thank the Lord. So one of the things I wound up doing this summer was signing up for a NetGalley account. And NetGalley is great because what it does is that you can submit to read advanced reader copies or arcs of books that have yet to be released. And basically what you agree to do is to read the book and to give a really good, full, detailed review of the book once you have completed it. So I read 3 NetGalley books this summer, and I have thoughts on all of them, but I will say that one of them was on my worst read, unfortunately. And that book was called The Haunting of Emily Grace, and it was by Elena Taylor. Now, the story itself, like the actual synopsis for the stories, was really interesting, and it's one of the reasons why I selected the book as one of the books I wanted to read. The premise is this woman who's just had like a painful event happen in her personal life takes a job. She's a woodworker, or she is, I don't know how you would describe, I guess you're a carpenter, but she's like an artistic carpenter. She takes a job working for this really rich person, this man who's like a tech billionaire, on this island that's right off the coast. It's like, I want to say Pacific Northwest, Washington state area. And he lives on this house that he's built right off of this island. And the whole scandal around him is that a year ago his wife disappeared. And so the whole thing is what happened to his wife, and did he kill her, or did she just disappear? And that alone was actually really interesting. And then there's also this aspect of the story where he has his daughter shows up. He has this adult daughter from a previous relationship that he was not close to, who suddenly appears while they are in this house, this woman and this tech billionaire in this house together. And it's basically like this really awkward dynamic between them. Sounds great, right? And it's the daughter's a little like sus and unhinged, and you're kind of like, oh, I don't know what's going on with her. That part of the story I found really interesting, and I was hoping that the author would do more with that, like that would be the story would be more fleshed out. It was actually a really short book. It was like less than 300 pages. And I remember getting to page like 250, 260 and being like, how are you going to, like, by that point, the story hadn't been wrapped up, and there wasn't, like, it didn't feel like we were at a resolution for anything. And so I was like, this is going to feel very rushed, which it wound up feeling very rushed. But on top of that, the title says The Haunting of the main character. Her name is Emily Grace. And it's like the author wanted it to be supernatural, but also wanted it to be a murder mystery and couldn't quite decide which was more important. And halfway through this, like, she keeps mentioning all these like spooky things. The fact that the house was built on like this like monk sanctuary, this monastery, but the monastery used to belong, the monastery was taken over. The monks took the monastery over. It used to be a nun's retreat, and they kind of came in and like took it from the nuns, and like they were really terrible to the nuns, and like there's a graveyard there, and then there's like a baby that's buried there, and like, who does the baby belong to, and all these things. And like, oh yeah, sometimes you can hear things. And so it's like these elements of like supernatural. And we're supposed to believe that, like, I feel like the author wanted us to think that there was that the character was like, could it be that she's just being haunted, or could it be these other things? But the way the story is written is that it's very clear that what's happening is actual real life things and nothing to do with the supernatural. And as a result, it kind of makes the character seem dumb, because there's not enough of the supernatural element in the story to justify her being immediately like Like there's a whole thing where one of the residents in the town tells her about a baby that's buried in the in one of the graves at the monastery, and then it just like hardly ever like comes up again. Like it's mentioned maybe one more time, but it's like, what was the connection to the actual story for that? Like, you know what I mean? Like there wasn't any connection to the meat of the story, which was the disappearance of this wife and the fact that the husband killer, that there was another man involved, was that she was friends with, were they lovers, did he kill, like did the daughter, like there's all like that story was really meaty, and I really wanted to like dive deeper in that, but she kept sort of like segueing to wanting it to us to be like, but was it a ghost? And it's like, no, it wasn't a ghost, it was a person. Like that's very well established. Like she does a really great job of establishing the fact that it's a person, but then trying to make you doubt yourself. And I'm like, but I didn't doubt myself because she didn't create enough of that world for that to make sense. And it felt very like cut off from the rest of the book. And then on top of that, there's a bunch of things that happen at the end, and it feels like the story to wrap up the murder mystery is like really, it's really bizarre. And like, I'm not going to give it away because, you know, I believe the book comes out either in October or November. I can't remember. But it felt like I said, like page 250, 260, she hadn't wrapped the story up yet. And I was like, how is she going to wrap this up? And because I think the book was like 280 pages. And I was just like, how's she going to wrap this up? There's so much to wrap up, and there's not enough time. And there wasn't. It just felt like she rushed everything, and everything happens in like the last 20 pages of the book. And it just feels very like unsatisfying and rushed. And it's like, the story wasn't able to breathe, and then on top of that, she rushes the ending. So I left a lot of notes because I felt like there was just a lot that needed to like be worked on, and I think the book needed to be longer. So that was the first like of the books that I would say was one of the worst reads that I read this summer. And then the second worst read for me this summer was A Separation by Katie Kitamura. And this was a fiction book about a woman who is separated from her husband. No one knows that she's separated from her husband. Well, I'll put it this way. People know, but his family doesn't know that they've separated. And he comes from a very wealthy, well-to-do family. This takes place in England. He comes from a very wealthy, well-to-do family. She and he have separated. She is still living, I believe she's still living in London in the home that they lived in, but he has just buggered off somewhere. And he was he's a writer, and he had one book that he wrote that was like very popular, and he's kind of been coasting on that one book and been working on his second book for like ages, doing research. And she kind of talks about the fact that he just was sort of like, she thinks he really just didn't want to write the second book, and he's been dragging it out. And so he goes to this island, and he goes to this small town, and I believe it's in Italy. I can't remember. I think it's Italy. And he goes to this small town, coastal town in Italy, and he disappears. And she goes, his mother calls her and says, I can't get in touch with him. He's, what's happened? Where is he? And the wife says, oh, he went to this town to research this book. And the mom's like, why didn't you go with him? And how come you didn't know that I can't? Like, the mom's just like, well, you should go be with your husband and go see what's wrong. Like, go check on him because I can't get in touch with him. And she's too afraid to tell the mother that they're no longer together, and it's really not her responsibility to go check on him. But she's too afraid to tell her that they're actually been separated for like 6 months, and she's already in another relationship. We'll get to that later. So she decides, because she's too afraid to just be honest, she goes to this town, okay? And she gets to the hotel, and it's like this small little hotel, because again, it's like this small little coastal town. And the concierge is like, she's like, yeah, my husband here? And he's kind of surprised, and he's like, oh, your husband? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, okay. And so he's like, well, I'm glad that you're here because your husband had like the suite, like the main suite in the hotel, and we have a couple coming who is going to be on honeymoon, and we need his suite. So we need you to like get all his stuff out of the hotel room, and we'll put his things in your hotel room. So they give her a room, and then they're like, we gotta kick his stuff out until, you know, because he's kind of like hasn't been around. So when they get to his hotel room, it's like he's still in the hotel. Like it didn't look like he was packing to leave. It just kind of looks like it was messy, and he was maybe probably expecting to come back, but you wouldn't, like, it was just like, it's kind of just like somebody who's being messy in a bedroom. And so she was like, oh, okay. So she's like, well, she's at this point, I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, something really bad has happened to him. Clearly he's been missing, because when she gets there, she realizes he's been missing for like 2 or 3 days at this point. And she's the whole time is just like not considering that something has happened to him. She's just sort of like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess put his stuff in my room. I don't know what could, you know, like she's just sort of like not, like, what's not, in the words of Little Beebs, what's not clocking, you know? So then, come to find out, her husband, one of the reasons why they split up is because he's a cheater, and he's been unfaithful. But while he's been, in the short time that he's been in this small town, researching this very obscure type of mourning practice that is only still done in this one town in Italy, because his whole book is about mourning practice, like people grieving practices, mourning, M-O-U-R, and not mourning like mourning in the day, like mourning practices, cultural mourning practices. And he's there for a specific type of mourning practice that used to happen in certain areas of Italy. I think it's Italy. And it's only still done in this one town. So that's why he's there. And so she, once again, and I think I'm going to go in with this color here, this Devil's Book color. So pretty. So yeah, so this whole time she's just sort of like more concerned at the fact, and which valid, she kind of realizes that all of these hotel people, all of these employees are kind of like acting strange, right? So she's like, there's the concierge girl, there's a younger girl who works at the concierge as well, because when she gets there it's a young man, and then when she comes back down it's a young woman, and the young woman is acting very sort of like almost like hostile to her, especially mainly because of the fact that she realizes that this is the wife of this man. So of course main thought is like, yeah, girl, she's probably been sleeping with your husband. Like, hello, you know? And she's just like, she's very strange and very hostile. She's like, she's like, he's probably been sleeping with her. And it's like, yes. So she's dealing with like that situation while also like trying to retrace his steps. And so she winds up like hiring this young man who is, again, this is a small town. They all know each other. So everyone in the hotel that works at the hotel kind of knows each other. And so this young man is friends with the young woman who she suspects of sleeping with her husband. And he is actually in love with this young woman. And he kind of like high-key hated her husband. So, but he takes her to, she's kind of like retracing his steps, and she's just like going to these different areas, and he's driving her around, and he's kind of like telling her like, you know, she's questioning him, but not in like a suspicious way. She's just kind of like trying to figure out, but she still won't say like, she's not being honest about what's going on with them. Like she's not saying that like, oh, we're separated, I can sit here. And he's kind of just like really clearly upset about the relationship between her husband and the girl, because he's in love with the girl. So all of this is back and forth of her having these like weird interactions with these people. Still and when I say this, still not suspecting that anything is wrong. She thinks he's just like, again, buggered off and he'll come back to the hotel for his stuff. But I'm like, 3 days, girl? He didn't pack any clothes with him. He like 3 days in a tiny little like there's not a lot of places for him to hide in the little town. So this whole time she's again going out to like look for him, can't find him. Still not thinking that something's wrong. And having these weird interactions. And then she finally has this one interaction with the girl who admits that she's been sleeping with the husband. And the girl is like, she's like, basically like, I don't feel bad. I love him and he loves me and I don't care. Like she's got that kind of like bravado of like, she can't be more, she's like probably no more than like 20. And he's like twice her age. And so the wife is kind of like, yeah, girl. Yeah, sure. Okay. Which honestly, same. Because she's just like, it's not like they were still together, but she's kind of like, this girl is very like young and dumb. And I'm like, valid. So anyway, so she starts to suspect things a little bit. Like, how come so-and-so didn't tell me that he knew that they were and blah, blah, blah. Cut to the next day, they find his body. And his body is like not far from where she had been, like looking for him. And I'm just kind of like, no one saw that. His body was just like in a body, like on like face down in like a body of water. And he had been clearly hit over the head and they think he had been robbed and kind of just left there. And she's just, you know, by this point she has to tell his family, his parents, that he's dead, but she's still not telling them that they weren't together anymore. So his family comes and his mom's like insane. And his dad is just like one of those like really emotionally distant parents who is very British, stiff upper lip. And he's like, you know, dealing with the police and the police are being really shady and sketchy. And they're not really giving them any information. And they're like, no, we're investigating. But, you know, it's kind of like that small town kind of like, they see the family as like interlopers, you know. And the mother is just like really terrible and to her. But at the same time is like, well, you're his wife. So you should have this, this, and this. And so like, when in his will, he hadn't changed his will. She wants him getting like a ton of money and all of this stuff. And still never saying that they weren't together. So she's playing this part of this, like this really like, she's like, and when I say this, she's not playing the part, like she's sad that he's dead. She's not like, oh, I don't care. It's just more like she's moved on. And not only has she moved on, but she's moved on with her ex's best friend, like their mutual friend. She's living with this man. Like she has a whole other life going on that she's just not telling anyone about, which I just find really kind of like, I just was like, this is gross. But to wrap it all up, my issue with the story was that I felt like it just wasn't, the story itself was fine. I think my main issue with it was that I just hated the main character. I hated her. I thought she was an idiot. I thought she was just like, I don't know. I found her so annoying that it took me out of the book. Because a lot of her choices and decisions just did not seem like what a grown woman would do. And the fact that she spends the majority of the book, like his body being found happens like towards the end of the book. She spends the majority of the book just like not at all thinking that anything could be wrong with him. And I'm like, how? He's in a foreign country where he doesn't speak the language, in a small town where everyone is like acting weird and keeping secrets. They never find who killed him, by the way. She suspects, for a short period of time, she suspects the taxi cab driver because he was in love with the girl who worked at the hotel who the husband was having the affair with. She suspects him, but she's too afraid to like confront him or to like tell anyone that she thinks it's him. I am of two minds about that. I think it could be him, but I also think it could be he just got robbed. That's the whole thing, is that you don't really know. And they kind of, the writer kind of leaves it open. So yeah, my issue with the book is that I just did not, for me, the idea that she would spend this amount of time, she would go to this foreign country where she doesn't speak the language to look for this man, and she's looking for him for like 3 days and can't find him, and it never once occurs to her that he's like dead. And it doesn't occur to her that he's dead until he's actually found dead, basically. I just found that really like, would that really happen? Would you really go to like, go all the way, and also just to go all the way to a foreign country for a man that you haven't been with in like 6 months? You're living with his best friend, and y'all are talking about getting married and having kids, and you're off, you decide to go off to look for this man that you haven't been with. And the only reason that he doesn't, the only reason she doesn't tell his parents, and this is one thing that I did find kind of interesting, is that basically like when they split up, he didn't want her to tell his family until they like actually filed for divorce. But they hadn't filed for divorce. They were separated when he disappears. So she, the whole time, she's just like, well, I'm just keeping my promise to him. And I'm like, girl, I think that promise is out the window. I think you need to like maybe tell them. I'm just thinking. So that is why I did not like that book. I just found the premise to be kind of like not believable. Like the fact that she would go this long and not think that anything was wrong with him. I'm just like, okay. Then the second book, I'm not going to talk about this one. I'm going to circle back to these 2 books, because technically I put 3, but it's actually 4, but they're part of a series. So let's get into the best books. So I read a lot of good books this year and this summer. So the first one I want to talk about is The Raven Scholar. And I am someone, because I read a lot, I will say I have a good memory, but after a while, I will say books can kind of blend together for me. So Raven Scholar, I listened, when did I read that book? I read it in May, maybe June of this summer. So it's been a minute. It's a big book. It was like 600 pages long, but I loved it. It takes place in this sort of mythical, it is a fantasy book. I wouldn't say it's romantasy. I would say it's, well, it does have romance in it, but not in the sense that like, I think like YA romantasy. It has like, it feels very grown up, but the characters are, they're all adults. They're not like teenagers or anything, but they're on the younger side. I'm looking for a pencil brush, like I don't know if I have one in here. I'll use this one. I have never used this. It's so teeny, teeny, tiny. See? But I just want to do something to the lash line. And I think I'm going to go in with this Witch City, this like black tone. And just put that along the lash line. So yeah, so Raven Scholar takes place in this world where there are different types of, I guess you could say like houses, and our main character is a scholar for the ravens, and she's a raven scholar, and she's literally just like, her job is to like study and read and old text, and she kind of gets called, she gets pulled into this intrigue in this kingdom, in this king's palace, because she does something really terrible. So I am going to be eating a little bit of my apple and coconut fruit bar, excuse me. So she does something really terrible. She basically signs the death warrant for a young girl, and because she does this, she becomes known to the king, who is the person who he exiles the young girl, but everybody knows that exile is death, because you're thrown out and you're driven around in like this car. It's like, it's terrible. She's young, and she is the daughter of the man who was trying to usurp the king. So this guy tries to basically stage a coup. He fails. He dies. He gets killed. And his family is kind of like, the king decides not to, even though he believes that all of them knew about it and all of them were not necessarily co-conspirators, but were accessories in a sense. But it's the wife and 2 small children. So it's the wife and her son and her daughter. And the daughter was the father's favorite. And all these years, so it's been like, let's say, I think it's been like 10 years since this had happened. The family, like, they lost all of their, like, standing in society, and they're kind of like, you know, lose their home, and they are sent off to live in this kind of like poor town, and they are watched constantly, and they're kind of a bit of pariahs and outcasts because, you know, they're the family of, you know, the guy who tried to steal the throne. And so every now and then the king will bring them to court to just kind of like talk to him and be like, what's good, what you talking about, who you talking to, what you doing. And he does that this time. Well, they think that's what he's doing, is that he brings them to court to kind of just do a little checky check on them. And come to find out, no, what he's actually doing is he's brought them there because the father wanted his daughter to join a specific house to become like an apprentice and to learn. And I forget what house it was. It wasn't, I forget where it was, but it was like some sort of place where you go to learn how to be a leader, like a warrior, you know, that type of thing. And he doesn't pick the son, he picks the daughter. And the son is really, really pissed off about this. So he basically tells the king this secret that his sister kept. And the king is like, yo, you're gonna really, like, the king is actually shocked. He's like, you really ratting your sister out like that? Like, that's messed up. Because he's mad and he's jealous. And he's like, well, okay. So I tell you what, he's like, since you feel that way, if you send your sister to exile, I'll let you, you know, he's like, if you really feel that way, do you want me to send your sister to exile? Do you want her to go away? I have so many lip glosses in my, this is what's in my purse every day. So I'm going through here just trying to find a lippy because I think I want to do a more neutral lippy. So he's like, okay, well, you know, if you really feel that way about your sister, then do you think she should be exiled? You know, do you think I should send your sister away? And he's like, so you get to make the decision for her. Do I, you know, send her to this school, or do I send her to exile? And the brother decides to send his sister to exile because he's jealous. And as a result, our main character, the Raven Scholar, she writes the warrant to send her to exile, where the sister eventually does die. And it cuts 2 years later, and now she's like risen in the ranks of, you know, of the king's esteem, and the king is now retiring. So the way the system works is basically like, and this is Nars Nympho. I love this shade so much. Is that a king is chosen by battle, not battle, but like competition, and which is why everyone was so upset when the young girl's dad tried to stage a coup, because he lost fair and square. Like, he was in the competition and he lost to the guy who became the king. But he thought he should have gotten it, and this dude was unworthy, and so he was going to take it from him. You know, so people were like, that's not right. You didn't win. So now we're cutting to years later, and the son who sent his sister to exile I'm actually really happy with this look. I think it's so pretty. I have a zit here, which is really annoying me. So if it looks like I just haven't blended well, it's not that. It's just the zit hanging out on my eye, my eyelid. So yeah, so the son, this dude who sent his sister away, he is now part of the competition, and he's come to like battle for his right to the throne. And our scholar has risen in the ranks. She's now close to the king, but she's hated. She is hated amongst everyone because of the fact that she signed a warrant for this girl who everyone thought that was really messed up and that she shouldn't have been sent to exile. Which, the thing about that is, did I think it was shady that she wrote it? And when she did it, she knew it was the wrong thing to do, and she did it because she knew that it would put her in the esteem of the king. So she does it. So in that sense, it's terrible. But also, like, the brother's the one who did it. The king is the one who allowed it. And so the son comes, but also the mother comes, and who is now sort of, she kind of still is around. She kind of hangs out. And she has another daughter, because there's 3 kids. There's one who's just too sick, and she kind of just, you never see her until like towards the end of the book. And the mother hates our Raven Scholar, hates her. And she loathes her son as well, because she wants revenge on both of them. Shenanigans ensue, and I just really like the book. I mean, there's so much more. It's weird because I'm telling you a lot, but I'm also not telling you everything that happens, because that's just like the setup for everything. If you like political intrigue, which I do, if you like political intrigue, if you like a story that is, all of the characters are drawn in a fully realized way. No one feels like they are a throwaway character. Like, I walked away from that book, and the way that it ends, I do believe there's going to be a second book, or maybe even a third book. It felt like fully realized world, fully realized characters that you cared about, characters that were complicated, that you don't like all the time, but you understand. You feel like your alliances sometimes flip and flop when you find certain things out. It was just very engaging, and like I said, it's a 600-page book, and I read it in like 3 days. I was like, because I needed to know. Very good. Definitely I'm probably going to put this in one of my best books of the year. Then let's get to Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. And this is a twofer. I read Legendborn in June of this year, I believe. Yes. Or June of this summer. And I loved it. It's a retelling. It is a retelling of King Arthur and his court in modern times, in the South, on a college campus, on sort of digging into racism, equality, secrets. There's magic. Our main character is, she goes to, I'm trying to remember what college she goes to. I believe she's in North Carolina. And she and her friend go to an early admissions class. So they're sort of like gifted kids who get to go to college a year early. And she is mourning the loss of her mother. Her mother died the previous, I'm going to say like 6 months to a year prior. And her mother did not want her to go to this college. She did not want her to do this thing that she's doing. And in fact, they had been arguing about it the night her mother died. But her father agrees that she should go. It'd be good for her to get away. So she goes and she starts this year of college as like an advanced student, but she's still a teenager. Like, she's not, she's still technically, she's underage. I think she's like 16 or 17. And as a result, she starts noticing all of these things. She finds out that there's this whole secret world, secret society that exists within this school and outside of the school in different states, and there's chapters and everything. And then it all involves King Arthur and his knights. And it deals with like magic, and it deals with, generational trauma. And it was just a really good book. It's like, I'm not someone who gets emotional very easily from stories. There are parts of that story that really, really got me in my gut, like really got me and really moved me. And so I was very excited for books 2 and 3. Now, this is an ongoing series. I believe there's going to be a fourth and final book. There is going to be a fourth and final book because the third book ends on like a massive cliffhanger. But I was very excited to read Bloodmarked and Oathbound. So Bloodmarked is the second book. Oathbound is the third book. And I have included these in my worst books that I read this summer. The whiplash, the emotional whiplash I felt after reading Legendborn and having it as one of the best reads that I've read this summer and this year, to those two books being the worst was and it's mainly built around the fact that the main character, keeps making the same choices where people wind up getting hurt. She feels guilty about it, and then she goes off and does it again. And it feels like we're on a hamster wheel of someone constantly making brash, stupid choices. And yes, I mean, one of the arguments for that is she's a teenager, you know, her brain's not fully developed. I agree with that to a certain extent, because I think about who I was as a teenager and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I would keep doing these things over and over and over again. I feel like after the second time and people got hurt, horrible things happened, I might have went, because she does realize that it's choices that she's made. That's the thing, is that she articulates that she realizes this and still does these really brash and rash, I would say rash and illogical and irresponsible and just dumb things throughout both books. And it gets worse in the second book, and the choices that she makes in the second book have very strong consequences in the third one. My main issue with the third book wasn't so much her choices, because those were like an ongoing issue. My main issue with the third book is that I felt like it was very like stuck, and I think it was because most of the action takes place in one location over like a weekend, and it just felt like the stakes didn't feel as high as they should have been based off of what was going on, what we were told is happening and needs to happen. It felt very like, I need all these characters to be together, and so for them to sort of learn things. And then there's at one point there's a point where there's this plot device that happens that I felt was very much a plot device. It didn't have to happen. And for me, I felt like I wish that the author had could get to where she needed to go without that plot device, because it was a necessary plot device. But she still comes around all the same characters, and then they all kind of congregate with each other anyway. So it's like, why did we do this? I just was like, I want more for this story. I want more because I know this writer, Tracy Deonn, I think she's an amazing writer. But I think this is also the thing that happens when books are turned into series, when publishers are pushing authors to get books out quickly and to tell stories in a certain way so that they can milk the stories for more books. That's what I felt these books have been a victim of in a lot of ways, because again, even though the story was stuck in this one location, it also felt very rushed. Like there just didn't feel like there was enough time to really build that world in the third book. Like there wasn't anything that it was sort of like the waiting room. The third book is like the waiting room for the fourth book. You know what I mean? Like where it's just like not a whole lot's happening. We got to get all these characters back together. How do we do that? Okay, we do this. Look at that. They're all back together. And then we find out this thing. And then this other thing happens at the end, which just felt so out of left field and very convenient. And convenient in a way where it feels like, again, plot is being chosen over character, which I am not a fan of all the time. I feel like character, especially when you've taken the time to build strong characters, when your characters are no longer the focus and more it's like about moving the plot along, that's where you lose me. So that's why I feel like for me, these are on my worst, not because I feel like they were necessarily the worst, but for me, they were the worst because they were the most disappointing after having loved Legendborn so much. And I have a 2 for again, but this is best. So on my best list is One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. I loved these books so much. Now, the character suffers from some of the things that I mentioned with, she suffers with one of the things that I do dislike about a lot of stories with characters where your character never asks a certain question or never questions a thing that is sort of the thing that I, as the reader, is the first thing I think of. My only defense for the character not really grasping this or figuring it out quickly is that she was really young in the story. Like, the story begins when she's like 11 or 12 years old, and she has this really heinous thing happen. Not like in the sense of she basically gets possessed by this creature. So nothing like like crazy, like traumatic, like real life things. But this thing happens to her, and she kind of just spends the rest of her life trying to hide it. And then the story goes on from there. But the main thing is that there's a plot device that I personally, when we are told how she becomes possessed, basically, my first thought of how she could get unpossessed, I immediately thought of it while reading the scene. And then we find out in this towards the end of the second book that that's the thing that could have like helped her. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Why did she not think of that? But then I'm like, okay, she was 12 and she panicked. Okay, she was a child. I get it. But even in all of that time, she still hadn't thought of it. And what I like about the books is that the author, Rachel Gillig, does a really good job of world building, in my opinion. I felt like I understood the world and the dynamics of it. It basically takes place in this town, this small town that is governed by magic. However, the magic can only be used by certain people who have these cards that are called Providence cards. If you are found to have magic abilities outside of that, it usually means that you've had this sickness. And what happens is these people get really sick, almost like the flu, and they either die or they survive, and their veins are like black, and then they also have magical abilities. And the king has given an order to hunt these people down and to get rid of them if they have these magical abilities outside of the Providence cards. And our girl has magical, she had this flu, she survives it, she has magical abilities, and at the time we think her magical abilities are because of this creature that she has been possessed by, but it's actually not. And that's not a spoiler, you kind of get that from the jump, that she kind of has two things going on at the same time. So the first book does all the work of setting this up, and the second book wraps up this really like centuries long story, because it doesn't really start with our girl, it kind of just like ends with her, and it very much ties into the creature that she's possessed by, which I also figured that out halfway through the book. I was like, oh, there's a whole thing of like who she's possessed by, and I figured that out pretty quickly, and I was like, it's weird to me that she hasn't figured this out. There's two things that I'm like, she hasn't figured this out. And again, usually that kind of thing where a character just doesn't ask the logical questions or come to the logical conclusions of things in their mind, that irritates me to no end. But in this case, I kind of understand to a point. The first one, because she was so young, and she like, when it happens, she panics and she doesn't really think about, she's not really thinking. The other one, not so much, because I'm just sort of like, girl, duh. Like, honestly, and if you read these books, you're gonna enjoy them, but if you don't guess who this person is, I would be shocked. But she does not. And it's very clear that the creature is kind of an anti-hero. He's kind of like, is he a goodie, is he a baddie? He's kind of both. But you wind up really liking this creature that she's possessed by. And I feel like the whole time I understood his motivations and no one else did, including her. And he kept kind of like telling her, but she wasn't listening. It's like she would only hear what she wanted to hear because she didn't really trust him, and she really wouldn't listen to him, even though he, up until that point, was literally like, I mean, he was possessing her, but he also protected her from things. And so he was kind of like her constant companion, but she saw him as an enemy. So as a result, he would be telling her things that were very important, and she would not listen. But anyway, really great books. I highly recommend. It's a great story. I love the lore. The lore top tier world building. There's some things that happen in the second book that are just like, what? And just blew my mind and like actually surprised me, and not in a way that was obnoxious, but in a way that was like, that's smart. And I love when an author can do that. So yeah, those were two of the best that I've read this year. And then the Murderbot series. So I've only read books 1 through 4, and then there are 7 books total. So I have 3 books left. I took a break from that. I'll probably read those because I have so much on my TBR, and I got a lot of books in through Libby and through the library. And I, just for the record, I don't buy a lot of books. I just don't. So I tend to either use Libby or go to the library, or I do also have Kindle Unlimited. So yeah, so I don't buy a lot of physical books. I don't own a lot of physical books anymore. Murderbot series. So if it's a series, a sci-fi series by Martha Wells that has recently been turned into a TV series starring my husband, who doesn't know he's my husband, Alexander Skarsgård. So I heard about the Murderbot series from Carrie Ken Reid, who had started it some time ago and talked about how great it was. And then I saw there was a TV show, and I'm like, you know what? It's on Kindle Unlimited. I'm going to read them. The books, the first few books, I would say the first 4 books are super easy to read. They're like no more than like 200 pages. Get them super easy. The story is so good, and each story is kind of like a standalone story. I would say start with the first book and go from there, but you can technically pick up one of the other books. You just, as the series goes on, like once you get to book 3 and 4, you're gonna have more of what happens in book 1 coming back around, like circling back to that. So if you want to continue the series and truly enjoy it, I would say start with the first book. But the story of Murderbot is this is a tale of the future, like a futuristic world where there are these bots called Murderbots. That's their nickname. I forget what their official name is, but they're called Murderbots that are used as security for different firms. Are sort of like leased out to people who are exploring other planets and other galaxies where they may come upon some danger, and they need security. So there are these bots that they lease from this company that creates them. And our character, everything is told through his point of view. First person is our Murderbot, and he is the only Murderbot to have ever hacked himself. And so he is no longer controlled by anyone but himself. He is a fully sentient, free will Murderbot. But he is also not a Murderbot who's intent on doing anything nefarious or anything like that. He really just wants to watch his TV shows in peace and protect the humans that he's paid to protect, that he's like licensed and leased to protect. He still pretends that he is not hacked. He is the only one that knows that he is hacked. And it starts off with him just wanting to like watch his shows, man. He sits in his little cubicle and he downloads tons of his favorite TV shows, and he just wants to watch his shows. But then shenanigans ensue, and he has to protect his humans. And the series is so, first of all, it's so funny. It's so unbelievably funny. His inner voice is hilarious. And I would find myself like cackling out loud while reading these books. So I highly recommend them if you're just looking for, if you like sci-fi, and even if you don't, I think the Murderbot series is a really great entryway to sci-fi, because it's not super like in the weeds about things. Like you learn things about the world itself, but it's not dense in that way. Like dense in the sense of like, I don't understand all of these things. It's very easy to follow. The stories are very quick. They're very light. They're very easy to read. And they were great reads for me when I wanted something to read to kind of de-stress with, but I didn't want anything super heavy. Very good series. And then I read on another note, very not light or anything of the nature of that nature, is Murderland by Caroline Fraser. And Murderland is a non-fiction book about serial killers. But, and this is what really got me interested in it, is it talks about the famous serial killers that we know, you know, like your Ted Bundys and your John Wayne Gacy's and, you know, your Israel Keys and your, all of these people, and their connection, the connection of them to specific areas that had smelting, you know, smelting factories where the people for a very long time, and it takes it mostly, it focuses specifically on Tacoma because that was like one of the biggest towns for smelting, if not the biggest town for smelting, for a very, 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 very long time. It follows the origins of smelting itself all the way up to modern time, but it talks about the role that lead and arsenic played in the creation of these serial killers and the connection of their lives to these areas that were pumping out tons of carcinogens and into the air. I mean, for literally hundred, like over 100 years. And it talks about the scientific role that played, because there is a study that has connected those things, lead poisoning and arsenic, to the brains of serial killers. And she talks about it from the actual history of it and where these smelters were in relation to these serial killers. She talks about their crimes. I will say the book gets really heavy towards the end because she talks a lot about the crime, but she really does a really great job of building the world of Washington State and Tacoma and the way people thought about things in that area. Very interesting. I was so fascinated by the book. I will say by the end of it, I was ready to be done with it because it does get quite heavy, because that's when she really gets into the serial killers and the killings. But it's such a well written book. And if you are someone who those types of things interest you, I mean, I know it doesn't interest everyone, but for me, the way my brain works, I was like, yeah, I want to know more about that, because that is really fascinating. And it was a fascinating read. Definitely one of the best I read. And then I also read, finally, Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And like I said, there's not a lot of books that make me cry or get me up or get me in my gut. And there's really been only two this summer, and that was Legendborn and Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, if you don't know, it's a very popular book that I am very late to the party with. But if you are like me and you're like, oh, I've heard of this book, but should I read it? Yes, you absolutely should. It takes place in the early 90s and goes into semi-modern time, current time. And it follows these two friends who create, well, 2 plus 1, so 3 friends who create this video game, this very popular video game, and this video gaming company. And it's about their relationship, their friendship from the time that they meet when they're children, these 2 people, until the time they're in college and into the time of adulthood. And it's a story about love and friendship and the complicated feelings of love and friendship, and how that gets more complicated when you mix business and when you mix creative art, into that, and egos and, past feelings and, past slights and resentments, and also love and friendship. It was a really good book. And there's something that happens in this book that just broke my heart. So, and I think someone else I know who finished the book and they were like, this book messed me up. And I was like, yes, and same. It's just a really good book. It's a good read. Highly recommend. I get why it was so popular. Next on my best list was Swordcatcher and the Ragpicker King by Cassandra Clare. Now, I am not a Cassandra Clare fan in the sense of, like, I find most of her stuff to be kind of like, why you got people why are we touching on, like, why we got brothers and sisters, why we got a brother being in love with his sister? That's nasty. Why are we doing that? That, you know, like Mortal Instruments type of stuff. I did not read the Mortal Instruments. I watched the movie and I saw the show. I watched the show that the movie was based on the books. Like, I've watched those things. The only thing I've watched are Carrie Ken Reid's summaries, epic breakdowns of the story. So you reading where she goes over it, so you don't have to read it. And top tier, but as a result, it's made me not want anything to do with that series. But I enjoy her videos about it, and I think she has one more coming up, so I'm very excited for that. But the Ragpicker King and Swordcatcher and Ragpicker King is a little bit different, and I have to say, they hit. They did, y'all. They hit. There's gonna be a third book, very clearly. You know, Cassandra Clare loves a series, so I feel like there's gonna be probably more than one more book, maybe two. Basically, so Swordcatcher and the Ragpicker King kind of is a continuation of the story, and it's very much palace intrigue. I will say that I think what I like about this story, and I love when stories deal with a world, but also like the intrigue and the politics of that world. And Swordcatcher starts with this young boy who is an orphan, who is chosen to be the sword catcher for the king's son. And the sword catcher is basically like the prince's bodyguard and double. So they picked this boy because he had a resemblance to the king's son, to the prince. But they also imbued this amulet, this pendant that he wears, with magic, so that when he wears it, he looks exactly like, in perception to everyone, he is the prince. He looks exactly like him. So he already has a resemblance, but then it makes him basically like his doppelganger. And it starts with this young boy sort of being snatched out of the orphanage and brought to this palace, this castle, and he's given a sort of a test to see if he's the right guy, like kid for it, and they choose him. And he meets the prince. They're both 12-year-old boys, and it cuts to years later when they're both adults, basically, but like young adults are like 20, 21, and maybe a little bit older, and they're thick as thieves, you know, they're besties. And this young man, who's this kid who is sort of pulled from this orphanage, has learned all of these skills. He knows how to fight. He knows how to, you know, his job is to catch the sword. That's what a sword catcher means. So a sword catcher is someone who, if someone tries to stab the prince, his sword catcher catches the sword. He takes the hit. And so he has this really sort of almost codependent relationship with the real prince. They're best friends. They do everything together, and he's sort of passed off as the prince's cousins because they do kind of look like family because they look alike. But the reason why he's always there is because he's the sword catcher, and he's the guy who kind of keeps an eye out for the prince. And it follows this story of, you know, this character finding out that there may be his prince may be in danger. And there's all of this palace intrigue going on. There is a murder. There's a couple of murders. There's, you know, this other king that lives in the area called the Ragpicker King. And the Ragpicker King exists alongside the real king, and they kind of like have this understanding that the Ragpicker King takes care, he's the king of the streets and the king of crime, and then you have the king, and they don't, you know, they kind of live parallel to each other, and they never cross, but they also don't get in each other's way. And things start to happen, and the Ragpicker King is a part of it, but not as much of a part as you would think. And then there's this other person comes who's kind of like trying to steal the Ragpicker King's throne in a sense. Shenanigans ensue. Great intrigue, fabulous intrigue. There's magic. There's a little bit of romance. There is romance. It's such a good story, and I devoured those books. And finally, for my honorable mentions, I want to talk about two books. So I've just finished A Theory in Dreaming by Ava Reid, which is the sequel to A Study in Drowning, which was one of the best books I read in 2024. I don't know how to talk about this book without giving things away. It's a really hard story to talk about, but I want to mention it. I just feel like if you haven't read A Study in Drowning, like I said, it's one of the best books I read last year, and the sequel came out this year, I believe this spring, summer. And I will say that the sequel does not live up to the amazingness of the first book. However, I still really enjoyed it because I do think it kind of wraps some things up that maybe were kind of lingering a little bit as far as what would happen towards the end of the first book. And if you, just to give you an idea of A Study in Drowning, and that'll kind of tell you what A Theory in Dreaming is. A Study in Drowning is about this young woman who has spent her years being kind of haunted by this fairy king, and her family does not believe her. They think that she is mentally ill, and so she's kind of like prescribed medication to help her, but she is actually being haunted, or I wouldn't even say haunted, but chased in some way by this fairy king. She wants desperately to be a literature scholar, but women are not allowed to be literature scholars. And so there's all these different colleges within this school, these like studies. And so she studies architecture, which is not her dream, but she feels like she can do it. And she winds up getting chosen to work on a new structure, to like create a new structure, blueprints for the home of this very famous author who has died. And I believe it's his son who is sort of wanting the home to be reimagined. The home is crumbling. It's on like this, right off of this cliff, and the edges of the cliff are constantly falling away because, and the rows are constantly being swept away because of this. It's right next to this really salty body of water, this ocean. She goes to this house. She finds out that she's not the only one there. The young man is there, the son is there, but also there's this other man who's there who's also a student who is there to study the works of this now deceased author. And she's jealous because she loved this author's work, and that's one of the reasons why she submitted herself for this job. And she finds out that this guy is basically doing the thing that she's always wanted to do. So they kind of butt heads at first. And then she finds out why he's really there. And he is there to study the works, but he's also there to study the works because he does not think the works were written by the man himself. And in the meantime, she is still being haunted and chased by this fairy king who is very much real. So that is a synopsis of A Study in Drowning. A Theory in Dreaming basically takes up where A Study in Drowning left off. And in the story for A Study in Drowning kind of does wrap up, but there are things that you kind of ask yourself, like, well, how do they work that? How would that look? Them going back to school after basically taking this man's work, who they then find out, spoiler alert, did not write the books that he said he wrote. His wife wrote them. And the story is very much about some of the themes of A Study in Drowning are men taking credit for women's work, women being silenced in lots of ways. And the book is just a real gut punch in a lot of ways. It's a beautiful story, and it sort of deals with what happens when people are angry at you for destroying the legacy of heroes that they hold in high esteem. That's really what A Theory in Dreaming kind of deals with. So it's a really good book. It's not as good as A Study in Drowning because it's just not as much going on, but I still enjoyed it. I still want to mention it as an honorable mention. And then the other honorable mention I want to talk about is A Problematic Summer Romance by Ali Hazelwood. I love Ali Hazelwood books. I haven't read all of her books. I've read a handful. I didn't love Deep End. I just didn't. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. But I do really, really like A Problematic Summer Romance. And the characters in that book are characters, it's a revisit of the characters from, so it's a spinoff of Not in Love, which I didn't love. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I was kind of, I was pretty indifferent to it. I thought it was fine. It wasn't my fave of her books that I've read. But it deals with the characters from that book. Two of the main characters, two of the side characters from the book are the main characters of Problematic Summer Romance. So it's the sister and the best friend of our male protagonist in Not in Love. And the story takes place at the wedding weekend or week, wedding week of those two characters from Not in Love getting married. And I loved it. I had a great time. The whole idea of the problematic aspect is that there is an age gap between the two characters because one is much younger. And well, I think the age difference is like a little over 10 years. So it's a significant gap, but the characters are both fully formed adults. Like, there are no underage people involved, and I didn't feel like there was a power imbalance, which I think is one of the main issues with those types of relationships. So for me, I didn't have any issues with it, but the characters themselves had great chemistry. It's a great story. There's lots of like, callbacks to characters and things in Not in Love that I did actually enjoy. And I thought it was a fun read. I just thought it was like an easy, like breezy. It's a summer book. It's a summer romance book, and it reads like that. The steamy scenes actually were pretty decent. Like, usually with steamy scenes, I'm kind of jaded that way. There's most steamy scenes I'm really kind of bored by, and I just kind of like whatever. Those were actually really good. So I didn't like, kind of like in Not in Love, I was just kind of like whatever. Problematic Summer Romance, they actually were really good. So yeah, I definitely wanted to give that an honorable mention. It wasn't like one of the best books I've read this summer, but it was definitely like one that I enjoyed, that I had a good time with. So yeah. All right, guys, so that is everything. This was a long one. I did my makeup so I could, have something to do. I'm sitting here chatting with you. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you like these kind of videos where I talk about books. This one is a bit longer because I'm wrapping up a whole season of books, but maybe I'll do like a monthly roundup for, books I've read for the month. I could do one for September. I haven't read a ton this month so far, but I do have a lot still on my TBR, so we'll see how the month shakes out. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye now.